Hello, welcome to Plus One to Gaming. I'm Eric,
And I'm Chris.
and today we're talking about choosing a class, part three of our ongoing character creation series. So, Chris, what is
Yeah.
a class?
Class is your character's job. It's their vocation. It's what they do in the game. And this is really important because your character's class and your character's identity are largely intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
And choosing a class is arguably the most important decision you're going to make for your character in the character creation process.
Yeah, we talked about it a little before. It's oftentimes, if not the very first thing I choose, the second thing. You might
Yes.
have your character in mind, and then what class are they?
Yeah, and you might even have a class or a class concept in mind, like from the get go, like, oh, I want to play a sneaky
Yeah,
rogue type. But
yeah.
the important thing when choosing a class is it is going to determine what your skills and abilities are. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to solidify your role in the group, and it's going to determine maybe any sub roles that you would take on. Things like cartographer or treasurer, and I think
Mm-hmm.
this is something that we can dive into as its own topic
Yeah.
later, those sub roles. But thinking about all of these things, it all rolls up into your class, and then it also can really influence how you're going to be role playing this character. The starkest contrast I can think of right now is a barbarian, Hulk
Mm-hmm.
smash, versus a bard who's going to be quick witted and role playing and
Yeah.
very engaging. Your preference is going to also dictate what you choose. I remember, especially us starting out, there were
Mm-hmm.
I felt overwhelmed. There were so many choices, and really then just struggling with the paralysis of choice because there's so many
Yeah.
classes and all of them are awesome and unique in their own
Yeah.
way. And then at this point there's 13 classes and I think almost 3 dozen subclasses in the official books. And then if you open up to homebrew and unearthed arcana, it's
Mm-hmm.
nearly limitless. Making the wrong choice can definitely ruin your experience. So I think it is important to talk about some different ways to kind of get there.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said in the beginning, it's overwhelming. But you read through, and usually I would have kind of an idea of what I generally play, what I like to play, what I would at least know what I don't want to play. So that would kind of weed those out a little bit. But then going through, looking through all the subclasses and getting excited about different ones, it's a process. And a lot of times I would want to come in with a specific class and then talk to my table mates in our zero session. And turns out, either they wanted to play that class or my class doesn't fit in the total makeup of the group or something. And then I have to kind of reassess.
Yeah, and it is because it is such a big decision for not just you but the entire table and game that you're playing. We mentioned earlier, making the wrong choice can really negatively impact your experience, and that can be like if you make a useless or ineffective character, you're going
Yeah.
to be floundering throughout the game.
Yeah.
If you don't talk and communicate with your teammates beforehand, you could
Mm-hmm.
be outclassed by your teammates, or you could bring some extra redundancies to the table that makes both of you kind of useless in a sense. You could be a poor match with your team. We talked about this in our episode 0,
Mm-hmm.
where if just by your alignment, from the class and character you've chosen, could alienate yourself from the group. Some classes have limited economy of resources, and what that means is, your options are limited, and maybe even your resources to use those
Mm-hmm.
options could be limited, which can limit your enjoyment of the character. And then sometimes it just doesn't work out.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
swiped right and you should have swiped left.
Yeah. At its essence, Dungeons and Dragons at least is an action economy game. It's a little weird to think of it like that, and it took me a while to kind of understand that and figure that out. That doesn't necessarily, if you have a character whose action economy isn't great, it doesn't necessarily make it not fun. Um, but if that's your thing, finding which class has the best action economy, and like you mentioned just a second ago, kind of meshing that with your team. You don't, if you're
Yeah.
stepping on each other's actions and stuff, you're severely hindering your team as a whole,
Yeah.
not just yourself.
And yeah, at that point too, you're reducing their economy of actions.
Yes.
So again, it's also creating a character is a very personal experience, but I think it's also a lot of fun when you take the greater party as a whole into account. And let's talk about that because we've been playing for a while, and veteran players, as you experience and try out different characters, you also play with other people who are playing classes in different ways than maybe you would have. But then you start to understand how the classes work, and it's just a lot easier to come to the class that you want. While this is, I think, maybe geared a little bit more towards beginners on how to not be so overwhelmed with picking a class, I do hope that more experienced players can at least take away some different perspectives on how to think of their characters or their classes in more of a maybe role-playing way instead of just the archetypical or metagaming type perspectives. We'll talk about some of the class picking methods and mindsets, and then one of the methods that we prefer to use for our games. How does that sound?
That sounds good. Choosing your class, I think, is so important. In the player's handbook, it is the third step, and it will be our third video in creating a character because we're following the player's guide. The second step is race. I usually skip race until after. I choose my class first because a lot of times I metagame a little bit. I want the race to support what class I am. I typically will start with a character and then the class and then the race. I just think it's that important.
Yeah, and again, like as you become a more skilled player, you can kind of make some of these decisions almost simultaneously. And also some other things, to hopefully help any player, especially new players. I think we'll break down each one of the classes. And sort of drop them into these categories, so then it's a little bit easier just at a glance to kind of see what the different traits and characteristics are, because some classes are more advanced to play than others. And coming in as a new player, if you're not aware of that, and the artificer sounds really cool, but it's so new and has these complicated mechanics that also haven't been really fleshed out and ironed out yet, maybe it's not, you get in there and you're just like, this character sucks, I hate it. It's not a bad class by any means, but sometimes it's good to get your teeth wet or cut your teeth a little bit on being a fighter. Get your teeth wet. That's a phrase. Sink them into some meat as a fighter, or sling some spells as a mage.
Yeah. So let's talk then about if we're breaking the different classes into buckets. What buckets would you generally say that the classes fit into?
D&D was, I think, one of the first games to be credited with, bringing a class system into the foray of this character development process. I mean, it was one of the first sort of tabletop role-playing games. But having the classes gives you these archetypical roles that you can adopt. Of course, there's the melee type fighter, and not just fighters, any kind of melee close combatant. You're using martial prowess. That could be the chainmail laden warrior, or it could be the unarmored monk, who relies on their dexterity. Of course, you have magic users, and those magic users can fall into a couple of subcategories. Control, you have outright just blow them all away with fireballs. And then you have different utility and support spells, and like those are your healing spells and charm and things like that. And then lastly, of course, you have the beloved rogue, our little rapscallion wag, who sneaks and steals and pickpockets and backstabs. So you have those kind of three main, types of classes, the roles that they fill. And then, the subclasses are really just blending things together into different and unique and fun ways. And that's what's awesome about it is, there's a class and a subclass to suit any preference. And finding your preferences, I think, is one of my first ways that I would recommend a new player. If I had to give, the elves seldom give unguarded advice, but I would suggest, what are your preferences? If I'm interviewing new players, session 0, and they're like, I don't even know what I want to play. It's awesome. In the games that you like to play, like video games, what kind of characters do you like? Do you like to sneak around? Are you Solid Snake? Or are you God of War? Are you Ares? And you got to go around and slice and dice and hack and slash your way through through all these foes. We could even do an exercise with you if you wanted to right now. Like, I know you have a huge affinity for Batman.
Yes, going way back.
Oh yeah, and characters, just like being your friend and knowing you for so long, characters like The Question. So I see all these characters that I know you like, and we've talked about, in our conversations past. And I see elite, sneaky, stealthy characters that blend into the shadows in their surroundings. Yeah. So if you were a new player at my table and kind of like knowing that, like, oh, okay, well, how about there's a ton of different rogue variants. Shadow Monk could be really fun for you. Ranger, taking elements and themes that pop up from understanding some of these preferences, and then being able to identify those and translate them to what classes are available.
Yeah, and that is interesting because the classes so intimately. You can in your zero session as a GM you can interview your players and kind of pull out those interests, those things that they enjoy. I always, when talking to people about it, ask them, like, especially, people who are usually interested in this have video games is such an easy translator. Yeah. They've played Skyrim before. So if you're going to fire up Skyrim, what is the first class you're going to make? What are you going to be? A sneaky archer? Are you going to be a two-hander? Are you going to join the Mages College? And that's usually a nice indication of kind of what they're into. Very similar to what you asked. And it, hopefully at least, a lot of people coming to this game are going to have that experience with fantasy before. If you don't have experience with any fantasy, it's going to be a little tougher to choose a class because a lot of them are dependent on you understanding, what a wizard is. Like you said, having those things that you already enjoy and already are interested in beforehand does translate and makes a very clear path into choosing what class you want to play, at least, for maybe your first class.
However you get there, what I would recommend is just really think about what you're going to enjoy most, or maybe what you think you'll enjoy most in terms of your character, and then be really good at that thing. And the reason I say that is for D&D and a lot of these collaborative role-playing games, the party really does function best when you have specialists instead of generalists. And that there's a lot of reasons for that. One, you're going to have you're going to have a solution to every problem that comes your way, but also it gives a chance for everyone in the party to shine in some way. You really you don't want to be the guy that just does all the things for everybody. You're not going to be the favorite person in the group. I can promise you that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ways to do that. Diversifying your roles. Even if you have two druids in the party, one could be a healing druid and one could be a wild shape druid to tank. And you have two classes of the same type, but completely different roles. Another example is, I generally like to play support classes. So I typically play, bards, clerics, arcane trickster, things like that. But there's a lot of different classes that can support, so I can kind of diversify my role that way.
And an interesting thing with subclasses is, like you said, you could easily have two druids. You could have an entire party of clerics.
Yeah.
Cleric subclasses, you could have focused on heals, one kind of focused on tanking and melee, one that's more of a caster. You could easily have all clerics in your party. The subclasses really do diversify these 13 major classes.
Yeah.
Almost infinitely. You mix and match your party.
Yeah, you can be a magic wielding barbarian, even though barbarians aren't supposed to, wield magic. Yeah. There's still that variant, which I think is really cool. Speaking of barbarians, which kind of gives us like a very iconoclast sort of typical role. What about playing against type? Playing with or against type? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And specifically with barbarians, maybe we'll start with that as my example. Barbarian is a class that I've never really been interested in. I'm not looking for the biggest damage or anything like that. I want a character that I can role play. And I've never been into what we would call like playing with type, like
Yeah.
the 8 intel kind of dumb, brutish barbarian. That's never been a character that I've been interested in being
Hmm.
in a group or role playing. Um, and so playing against type would be the opposite, or just something that you're not expecting.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
smarter barbarian.
With a barbarian, for example,
Hmm.
the mechanic of rage is one
Yeah.
of their core things. So what if your barbarian is quiet and reserved
Hmm.
until they conjure forth this blood curdling rage, and they go
Yeah.
off and in a flurry and whirlwind and eviscerate their foes.
And yeah, that would be what I would consider like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, or the Hulk, which
Hmm.
they're the same character. And that's kind of fun. You can, so in your role playing, you can, role play as, like you said, timid or even smart or whatever. Your character can be whatever, and then you fly into a rage through whatever
Yeah.
reason, the blood of your ancestors or however you obtain this power.
Right. Just
That
I
would be
guess
playing against type.
what I would want to encourage people with this is don't feel like just because of the class that you choose,
Hmm.
you are forced to play this character in a certain way.
Exactly.
So if you
Yeah.
want to play a well-spoken barbarian, go for it. Break the
Yeah.
mold. Do it. I would be.
Exactly.
I would welcome that barbarian at my table more so than the, well, I kill smash. Like, okay, that's
Yeah.
that done. That's old
And I
hat.
feel like a lot of us and a lot of players in general, when you very first start, it's so easy to play those traditional roles.
Yes.
You've got the dumb barbarian who just wants to smash. You have the evil tiefling warlock who is just trying to undermine and do his own thing.
Mhm.
You have like the goodly paladin. And then maybe your next character you add a little more gray area, and the next one you add a
Yeah.
little flavor. And the more and more you play, the more characters you make, you're going to get better at breaking those molds and getting away from the stereotypical whatever that class does. I think that that's so much more fun because it's just unexpected.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with playing two type, and because again,
Yeah.
like you said, it's easy to get there, and if you're new to
Hmm.
role playing, it makes it's a good shortcut, it's a good heuristic to use to make
Yes.
that transition into role playing so much easier. But as you said, as you get more advanced, you can start adding layers like onions, ogres.
Like ogres and onions.
Mm-hmm.
So and I know we both, me more than you, you've always come up with interesting characters that I thought were a little against type or out of the mold, outside of the box. Once you do get that out of your system and play the dumb barbarian and the heroic paladin and whatever, like we said, you start to have more tools in your toolbox. The way
Mm-hmm.
that I like to build my characters now, I typically have a character in mind that I want to role play
Mm-hmm.
first.
Mm. Yeah.
And then depending on really a lot of things, then I figure out what class would this character be. So like I said, I do that before race because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times race doesn't, it could be any race. So I think of a lot of times the way that I'll do it, I'll mix maybe a few different fictional characters like Han Solo mixed with Indigo Montoya with Jack Sparrow. And you find a character and then you get them in your mind. One of my characters that is one of my favorite characters I've ever made was a pirate. And typically you would think he would be a swashbuckler rogue, but I made him a fighter. I really enjoy the fighter class.
I remember
Um,
pushing you to choose the swashbuckler class as well.
because that would be with type for
Mm-hmm.
that class. Okay, he's a pirate. Like swashbuckler is a pirate.
It's
Like
a
that
pirate
makes
class.
sense. But I wanted him to be more of a martial person, with the skill with the sword and different things, and not really a sneaky. I don't know. It it didn't feel right,
Yeah.
and it was kind of fun. I really do like just plopping characters into a different class and seeing kind of how they figure it out.
Yeah.
a different class than the one that you would normally think they would fit in.
Well, and I believe that character's sort of backstory or history kind of informed why he was a fighter, not a swashbuckler rogue.
Yes. And I had that written before. I actually, to be totally honest, didn't realize the swashbuckler rogue subclass was there. I think I just overlooked it. So I wrote his backstory, had this character in mind, figured like, okay, he's a battle master fighter because that's who this person would be. And then you came suggesting the swashbuckler, and I wavered. I thought about it. But looking at the class, I was like, nope, these aren't things that he would do. The fighter things are the things that this character would do. So a little bit of playing against type. He wasn't a heroic fighter on the side of good and justice. He had his own motives and his own path to get to like meet his ends. But I thought it fit really well with the character, and that now is the way that I try to figure out what class I want to play.
Well, so 2 points that I want to make based off of that. One, just like anecdotally as a fellow player in GM, but I noticed once you started doing that, the quality of your characters and sort of I noticed like your enthusiasm to play them really increased dramatically.
And I can draw a very specific contrast between the character I made when we played Strahd was a Shadow Monk because I liked Batman. And the Shadow Monk class has a lot of really cool mechanics that I thought would be fun to play. And I had zero character. I didn't know who this character was. He was just a class.
Yeah.
So most of that game, I was like lusting after other classes. Like, ooh, I want to play this. Ooh, what next? I'm going to play that. Whatever it is. So the whole time I spent thinking about all the other cool mechanics I wanted to use. The whole time I was just thinking, like you said in the beginning, every class is fun. Every class has a lot of cool mechanics. I think if you build your character based off of mechanics, you're going to, I will at least, always be thinking about other cool mechanics because you're never going to get all of them.
Yeah.
So that character had no character.
Yeah.
And then the pirate character, I didn't care about any other class. I just wanted to see where he went, what he did, how he got into scrapes, how he got out of scrapes.
And really the class didn't matter because you were playing the person.
Exactly.
You just happened to have these, abilities. And the other point that I wanted to make was this is a classic instance of what's the obvious choice might not be the right choice for you.
Yeah.
You did talk about mechanics, and I think, falling into that trap, at least in that Shadow Monk example, he was kind of a one-trick pony with the mechanics he could rely on.
Yes.
And over time, for a one-shot adventure, that could be a lot of fun. But over a long game or a long campaign, that can get could get boring. Or not. That's up to you. With the Captain Dex, the obvious choice wasn't the right choice for the character you wanted to play. And I think that's really important. We were talking about creating a couple of characters for some side stories, a monk and a knight. And I wanted to create the knight character, and I got excited about it. And of course, like Battle Master or Champion is clearly the superior choice. But the vision that I had for this, more chivalrous, charismatic knight, Purple Dragon Knight or the Banneret has to be the class.
Yeah.
It's not a great fighter class.
Yeah.
It's being honest. But that's okay because I want to play this character. Like, I'm not really concerned. Fighter's a good class regardless. But there's other mechanics that I can, bring into the character and other ways that I can play this character. I'm not playing necessarily the class, even though the class is a part of that character's identity. It's up to you to decide how that manifests. Yeah.
So we spent the first portion of this video talking about how class is maybe the most important part of your character. Obviously, the character is the most important. We feel at least.
Yeah.
Class is a close second to that. But many of the characters that I like envision and really get close to and refine, I could fit him in almost any class. Like, that pirate could have been a druid. Like, I would have had to figure out a backstory or different things. Like, it would have tweaked a few things, but it wouldn't have changed his personality.
And that's the thing, like when you remove class from the equation, who is this person? What is their background? What abilities and skills do they have? Where do they get them? You know, do they have a prior history with the other party members? And how has this influenced like them, their development, and their teamwork? Think about all this stuff. It's really good, rich stuff to go over, and it's fun to geek out on. As you're trying to come up with some cool, new, exciting characters to create.
Yeah, and I think that we are building this series off of the Player's Handbook, and I think that it sort of does a disservice in this specific instance, because I don't think it emphasizes enough that point. Like, make your character's personality first. Figure out who this person is, and then all of the rest of this stuff is going to be easy.
Yeah. All right, my friend, we have talked a lot today about choosing class. We've talked about how to pick a class, a few different ways to get there, different ways to build character to inform your class. So I think on the next episode, we should break each class down into categories and give just a good analysis of each one so people can kind of quickly see the differences and similarities between them. So that's all for today, folks. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click that notification bell. It updates you on new episodes and goes a long way in supporting the show. Subscribe to the newsletter and get new content and exclusive bonuses delivered straight to your inbox. Never spam! And stay tuned for the next part of our ongoing character creation series, where we break down each of the characters and categorize them. Thanks for watching.
And we'll catch you next time.